Like you've gone into like the local restaurant and found out that your, super cheap, weekend special went up 10 cents and you complain to your server because I know Brian's really cheap when things go up 10 cents. He complains to his servers. And the server says, I know, I talked to the owner and the owner said the rent went up so they had to raise the price. Have you ever heard someone say something like that?
Never.
Welcome to the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show, where hosts Brian Leverage and Jeffrey Holst pour our old fashioned real estate advice.
Episode 17.
Hello, and welcome to the Old Fashioned Real Estate Show. My name is Jeffrey Holst.
And I'm Brian Leverage.
And we're going to talk about a topic that we've never talked about on the show before, David Ricardo's Law of Rents.
Yes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about David Ricardo before we get into his law?
Sure. So David Ricardo is was a British parliamentarian.
Because he's dead.
Yes, he died in 1823, as we discovered on the last take of the show. And anyway, he is a political economist and a parliamentarian, and he's most famous for his works, The Principles of Economy and Taxation, which came out in 1815. Which if you haven't read, you probably shouldn't because it's real boring. It's real dry and boring. But there's some very important points that came out of that. And one particular point was the law of rents. And the law of rents is what we want to talk about today. And the reason we want to talk about it is because it answers a fundamental question in real estate. And that is how rent prices are set.
Right.
And if you're going to invest in real estate, that's actually sort of important to you.
Yeah.
What causes rent? And we probably all heard, like you've gone into like the local restaurant and found out that your super cheap weekend special went up 10 cents and you complain to your server because I know Brian's really cheap when things go up 10 cents. He complains to his servers. And the server says, I know, I talked to the owner and the owner said the rent went up so they had to raise the price. Have you ever heard someone say something like that?
Never.
Never. What about you, Cameron? Have you heard something? Cameron's our camera guy. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah, so Cameron's heard that before, even if you haven't.
I go to restaurants with no price increases.
That makes sense, right? So you only eat at home.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, so the point is, you hear this all the time in the real world, right? People say, "Hey, I had to raise prices because my rent went up." Mm-hmm. And David Ricardo was thinking about that, and he was wondering, and he was thinking of corn, not restaurant prices, but he would say, "I wonder if the price of corn is high because the rent is high, or if the rent is high because the price of corn is high." Right. So that's really the question. And I think for our purposes, we'll think of something that maybe people are a little more familiar with. Let's talk about movie ticket prices.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, David Ricardo wanted to answer that. And it turns out there is actually an answer, and it's a little counterintuitive. It's actually the opposite of what most people think. It's that the rents are actually what are responding to the price of the movie ticket prices. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it this way, in sort of a general sense, if you buy a movie ticket in Manhattan, it's probably like $25 now to go to a movie in Manhattan. If you buy a movie ticket in like some little tiny town,
Chattanooga, Tennessee,
or somewhere even smaller than that, maybe the ticket price might be $5 or $6 for the same movie, the same product, but there's a difference in price. And so one person might say, well, of course the tickets are more expensive in Manhattan because rents are really expensive. And David Ricardo would say, no. The reason that rents are more expensive is because the operators of the movie theater can charge more for tickets.
Yeah.
People are willing to pay more. So that's the basic idea behind David Ricardo's Law of Rents. So this is how he kind of got to this and how he proved it. And I will admit, this topic is a little esoteric and it's a little involved. So feel free to drink a couple extra drinks during the show today. Brian and I are on our first ones, actually. So this is an early episode. And the show might actually be better if we drink more, but it turns out that when you're talking about detailed topics with really fancy graphs like this one here. Yeah. Did you see this graph, by the way? Yeah, very
impressive.
Nice. Yeah, so when you're doing things like that, you need to be stone cold sober.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing. All right, so here's how Ricardo figured out the law of rents. He envisioned a situation where there's a new colony, say America, for example, right? So people are in Britain and they're coming over to America and they're settling America. Well, when you arrive on the shores of a new colony, the land is essentially free. Right? There's no cost. You can't charge rent because the next person that arrives in that
The
colony
supply is abundant.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's three different pricing powers actually that Ricardo looked at, and the first one was abundance. If there's an abundant supply, then it's not going to be very
Prices are
valuable.
lower,
Yeah, exactly. Scarcity, of course, is the inverse of abundance. But anyway, so when you first arrive in a colony, rents are free, their land is free, so the person's just going to pick the best land. We're going to call that level 1 land, superior grade land. Maybe by a river, nice and flat, easy
on a hill, or
easy to
something
farm.
overlooking.
Yeah, the perfect place to put a movie theater, whatever it is, right? So, so you arrive in the new colony and you take the first land. So when I arrive, I start my farm. I start farming, and a little while later, Brian shows up, and Brian says, "Man, I'd like to have a farm." And I say, "Hey, I'll rent you my farm. What are you willing to pay for my farm, to rent my farm?" At that point,
Probably not much.
probably not much. Exactly. In fact, the official amount that you'd be willing to pay is the depreciated value of the labor I've put into the land.
Yeah.
So if I've already plowed the land, you're going to pay something for that because I put some labor into the land. But
If I
otherwise,
have to clear it and do
yeah,
everything
if you've
else,
got to
it's
do
worth
it,
less.
you're
Yeah.
just going to go next door and take a free piece of land that's substantially similar. So that's sort of the starting point, and that's what this graph's about. So we got this fancy graph, and we're going to imagine that this 100 represents 100 movie tickets.
Okay.
So when Brian comes to my new farm, I say, "Brian, my land produces 100 movie tickets." Okay?
Yeah.
And I will rent it to you for 100 movie tickets. And you say no because I won't make any money. And besides that, I can go take a different piece of land for free and get my own 100 movie tickets.
Sure. And I don't go to the movies that often anyway.
Right. So
Go on.
that's plenty. That's 100 movie tickets is enough for you and your family.
Yes.
So you're good. Now, at some point, though, all of this level 1 land, this first graph bar here, right? All of that land's taken up. So Cameron shows up and he takes a level 1 land, and then maybe some other people show up, and pretty soon all that's available is level 2 land. And then I've been there for a while, and I've gone to a lot of movies, so I say to the let's see who's showing up here. We got. So some other person, let's go with Mick Jagger. So Mick Jagger shows up and he's thinking, I would like to have my own movie theater.
Yeah.
He comes to our new colony, right? And he has a choice. He can take level 2 land. Well, he could take level 3 or 4, but he's not going to because those only produce 60 and 40.
Yeah.
But he can, for free, he can have 80 movie tickets a year by just taking this land. Or he could pay me rent because I'm kind of sick of the movies, or maybe Brian's sick of the movies. In fact, we're both sick of the movies, right? So he could pay us rent. And I say, you know what, Mick, for 5 movie tickets a year, I'll let you use my land. Well, at that point, he could pay 5 and he gets 95 movie tickets, right? So he's going to do that. But then you say, well, screw that. I'll do it for 4 movie tickets a year or whatever, be like, and we keep, at some point, we're willing to, he's going to say, his point of indifference is 80, right?
Yeah.
So he'd be willing to pay up to 20 movie tickets a year, right? So if there's 3, 4, 5 new Micks come to town, the Beatles show up and John and Ringo and all those guys are here and they're all wanting our land. Pretty soon, they're all willing to pay 20 or they'll just go get this land here.
Yeah.
And this sort of applies and it ratchets all the way down. So we don't have to go through every possible example and come up with 40 more people. But the point is that if at some point, the land's getting less and less quality, and at each point, and this is the critical point here, is if your choice is you can have level 4 land, or you can rent level 1 land, you'd be willing to pay the difference between 40 and 100 or 60 movie tickets to rent because you're indifferent. It's the same result. But why that's important is the person that was renting level 3 land when it was, was paying this, at each point, it ratchets it down, right? So it always goes to the lowest common denominator. And then at some point after that, you're going to run out of land entirely, okay? And when you run out of land entirely, you run up against the border, now we're at the Pacific Ocean, there's no more movie theater land, right? Then, instead of looking at the difference between the productivity of the land and the productivity of the best land, they're going to look at what is the acceptable standard of living for a person in that area. Because their next best alternative is to go get a job at the movie theater and get paid in movie tickets. And maybe they get paid 10 movie tickets to work at the movie theater, right? So now they're down here somewhere, And they're thinking, I can either work at the movie theater and get 10 movie tickets, or I can run this land and get 100, but what would I be willing to pay in rent to do that? And the answer is 90 movie tickets. Because you're always going to that lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
And that actually is the reason that rents get set how they are. So that sounds really interesting in sort of a theory, right? But the real question is, how does that work in real life, right? I mean, and why is that important to us as real estate investors? And I'm going to put this away now. I hope you guys are okay with that. I'll tell you why it's important. And I think Brian would agree with this. It's because if you think about that logically, what happens is you have the entirety of all of the economic value that's attributable to the land going to the landowner, right? So you're only going to be pay out, or really basically what a landowner is going to do when they're setting their rents is they're going to give only as much profit to the operators of that land as necessary to keep them. And that number is going to be based on a bid curve, and it's going to be whatever the lowest operator is willing to accept to keep that land. And so it becomes a supply and demand curve that's different than your traditional supply and demand curve. Land prices and rent prices aren't set by people bidding up supply and demand, like there's a lot of demand for land. It's the demand for the use of the land. And this is something that Adam Smith said. He's another economist, not David Ricardo. Most people have heard of him.
A little more well-known.
Yeah, a titch more well-known. Adam Smith said that all land fundamentally operates as a monopoly. And that gets back to the pricing power we were talking about at the beginning with scarcity. There is a scarcity of land. I mean, there's a lot of it, but there's a limited quantity of quality land. And so you have scarcity. And you have a necessity, right? So that's another pricing power. I think they used different words than that, and I could dig through my notes and try to find them, but there's that necessity, there's scarcity, and then there's also productivity. So you have those three variables, and that really sets the value of the rents that you can command for a piece of land. And that's what sets the value of the land ultimately. When we talk about cap rates in a future episode, which we'll tag in the notes, it will, we'll be able to see how that rents actually determine value.
Right. Anything else to add?
Well, so just to summarize, this is, in my opinion, the reason why there are more millionaires made in real estate than in any other field. And we've talked about that before, but what it ultimately comes down to is you can be the most innovative business in the world, and as soon as someone copies you, it's going to drive up the rents and cause the landlords to benefit from your innovation. So you get a short-term extraordinary profit by innovating or by doing some hard labor. And that's not to say that business people don't make money. They certainly do. They have to be rewarded for that risk, but they're only going to make as much as the next business person would be willing to accept. And anything above and beyond what the next business person would be willing to accept goes to the landowner. So if you're a business owner and you don't own the land that you're on, you should consider buying the land. And that's where I would leave the show. So do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you covered all the bases pretty thoroughly.
Great.
So.
Well, if you're still with us at this point, we'd ask you to subscribe to our show, give us the thumbs up, and ring that little bell that allows you to get notified when we put new episodes out. And of course, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and send us an email, whatever you want to do. Reach out and tell us you love the show. We always love it. Thank you very much.
Have a great day.